You know, some moments in history just change everything. We're talking about a single day, way back in 490 BC, that pretty much decided the fate of an empire, a brand new democracy, and maybe even the future of the Western world as we know it. This is the story of the Battle of Marathon. Okay, so picture this, a wide open coastal plain just northeast of Athens. It's called Marathon. On one side, you've got this massive Persian invasion force. They're the undisputed superpower of the ancient world. And on the other, a tiny army of citizen soldiers from Athens, fighting for their homes, their families, their very existence. I mean, the stakes just could not have been higher. And that's really the heart of the story, isn't it? How did they pull this off? Because if you look at it on paper, this should have been a total slaughter. The Athenians were outnumbered, they were outmaneuvered, and their best allies, the Spartans, they were nowhere in sight. So how in the world did they win?
What's really fascinating here is that when the Athenians showed up, the battle didn't start right away. Nope. For 5 long, super tense days, these two armies just stared at each other. The Athenians were smart. They blocked the exits from the plain, basically trapping the entire Persian army with their backs to the sea. It was a complete stalemate.
This right here is the great mystery of Marathon. Why wait? What were they hoping for? And what could have possibly happened on that 5th day that finally just unleashed all that violence? The answer, it turns out, isn't on the battlefield itself. It's in the mind of the Persian king who sent them there. Meet King Darius I. He was the ruler of the massive Persian Empire, and his invasion of Greece wasn't just some random act of conquest. Oh no, this was personal. It was all about revenge. He was furious that Athens had helped out some Greek cities in his empire when they rebelled. To Darius, that was an insult he just could not let slide. In fact, the ancient historian Herodotus tells this incredible story. He says that Darius was so obsessed with getting back at Athens that he actually ordered a servant to say this to him 3 times at every single meal. This wasn't just a military operation. For King Darius, this was payback. And you have to understand what the Athenians were fighting for. It was so much more than just survival. See, they had just overthrown a dictator, and it started this radical new experiment in self-government they called democracy. These weren't professional soldiers, they were citizens, farmers, potters, thinkers, fighting for their own laws, their own voices, their own freedom. Okay, let's talk numbers for a second, because this is where it gets kind of crazy. The Athenians, with a few allies, managed to scrape together about 11,000 soldiers. The Persians? Most estimates put their infantry at over 25,000, and that's not even counting their powerful cavalry. This was a true David versus Goliath situation. But the Athenians had an ace up their sleeve, their gear. The Greek hoplite was basically a walking tank. We're talking heavy bronze armor, a huge shield, a long spear. They were built for brutal face-to-face combat. The Persian soldiers, on the other hand, were lightly armored. They were designed to fire arrows from a distance. If it came to a close-quarters brawl, the hoplite had a massive advantage. But, and this is a huge but, there was a massive problem. The Athenians had sent their fastest runner, a guy named Phidippides, to Sparta to beg for help. But the Spartans were in the middle of a sacred religious festival, and they said they couldn't march until the next full moon, which was at least 10 days away. The Athenians were completely on their own. So that brings us right back to that mystery on the plain. With Spartan help eventually on the way, the smart play was to wait it out, right? So why on earth would the Athenians risk everything and attack now? What could have possibly happened to force their hand? Well, here's the leading theory, the one most historians agree on. The one thing the Athenians were truly terrified of was the Persian cavalry. Hoplites were tough, but on open ground, they were sitting ducks for a cavalry charge. But then, an ancient text says the Athenians got a signal. The cavalry left. The theory is that the Persians got tired of waiting. They started loading their horses onto ships to sail around the coast and hit the undefended city of Athens directly. And that was the moment. With the terrifying cavalry out of the picture, the Persian infantry was finally vulnerable. The Athenian commander, a brilliant general named Miltiades, saw his chance. He knew it was now or never. He gave the simple, terrifying order to his men, at them. And what they did next was absolutely unthinkable. Instead of the usual slow, steady march, the entire Athenian army broke into a dead sprint for the last 200 meters or so. This had never been done.
It was a wild gamble to get across the deadly killing zone of the Persian archers before they could cut them to pieces. You can just imagine the Persians staring, thinking these guys had to be completely insane.
But the real stroke of genius was Miltiades's formation. He intentionally made the center of his battle line thin and weak, but he packed his best, strongest troops onto the sides, the flanks. Just like he predicted, the elite Persian soldiers smashed right through the weak Greek center. For a moment, they must have thought they were winning. But then the powerful Greek flanks crushed the weaker Persian sides and wheeled inward, surrounding the Persian center in a perfect, deadly trap. The result was an absolute catastrophe for the Persians. Herodotus, the historian, reports that 6,400 of their soldiers were killed right there on the battlefield, and who knows how many more were lost as they panicked and ran for their ships. And the Athenians? After all that brutal, day-long fighting, how many did they lose? A stunningly, almost unbelievably low 192 men. This wasn't just a victory. It was one of the most lopsided wins in the history of warfare. But hold on, it wasn't over yet. The Persian fleet got away and immediately started racing towards the now defenseless city of Athens. So the victorious but completely exhausted Athenian army had to turn around and force march 27 kilometers, that's about 17 miles, all the way back home. They got there just in the nick of time, lining up on the shore as the Persian ships appeared, saw they were too late, and just sailed away. So why do we still talk about this one battle 2,500 years later? Because it proved that the invincible could be beaten. It saved that fragile little experiment of Athenian democracy, which gave us so many foundational ideas about philosophy and art and politics. You can honestly argue that the world we live in today was born on that bloody field. Seriously, think about it. The victory at Marathon was a massive turning point. It let a culture flourish that would become a cornerstone of our civilization. So you have to wonder, if those few thousand Athenians had failed that day, would our world look anything like it does now? It's a pretty chilling thought, right? That so much of history can turn on a single desperate charge.